Welcome to this risk management interview for the medical device industry. In this session, we'll cover real-world, scenario-based questions designed to assess a deep understanding of risk management principles. The answers are structured yet conversational, just like a real discussion you'd have in an interview.
I would like to start the interview by asking a simple and basic question. 1. Can you walk me through the risk management process in the medical device industry?
First, we start with risk management planning. What's the scope? Who's responsible? What regulations apply? Then we move to hazard identification, where we systematically pinpoint potential hazards. Could be mechanical, biological, electrical, usability related, anything that could pose a risk. Next comes risk analysis. We assess severity and likelihood using tools like FMEA, failure modes and effects analysis, and FTA, fault tree analysis, to break down failure scenarios. Now, just because we find risks doesn't mean they're all showstoppers. We go through risk evaluation to see if they meet our risk acceptance criteria. If a risk is too high, we apply risk controls, design tweaks, protective barriers, training, labeling, anything that reduces the danger. But even after mitigation, we're not done. We assess residual risk. Is what's left still acceptable? Does the benefit outweigh the remaining risk? Finally, it's an ongoing process. Post-market surveillance VMS tracks real-world data to spot any new risks or trends we may have missed.
That's a great explanation. 2. Why do we conduct FMEA and hazard analysis separately?
Good question. While both assess risk, they work at different levels and serve different purposes. FMEA is a bottom-up approach. It looks at potential failures within a device's components. For example, an implant might fracture due to material fatigue. We analyze that failure mode, its probability, and its impact. We then assign risk priority numbers, RPNs, to rank the risks. Now, hazard analysis is top-down. It looks at the bigger picture. Instead of a single failure mode, we ask, what overall risks does this device pose? Things like infection risk due to improper sterilization or allergic reactions to materials. Here, we evaluate risk by comparing likelihood versus severity rather than assigning an RPN. Both are crucial. FMEA keeps the device functionally sound, while hazard analysis ensures we're catching broader system-level dangers.
As you said, both approaches serve different purposes, one focusing on component failures and the other on overall system hazards. That distinction is important in ensuring a thorough risk assessment. 3. Can you provide an example of FMEA and hazard analysis for an orthopedic implant?
Absolutely. Let's take a hip replacement implant, a classic example. FMEA. One failure mode, material wear over time. This could increase friction, cause patient discomfort, and even lead to a revision surgery. We'd evaluate the occurrence, how often this happens, severity, pain, surgery risk, and detectability. Can we catch it early with x-rays? Hazard analysis. Say the implant contains nickel. What if a patient has a nickel allergy? Even if the implant itself works perfectly, this biological hazard could trigger inflammation and pain. Here, we'd assess likelihood versus severity and implement controls like hypoallergenic ceramic coatings. See the difference? FMEA looks at what might break. Hazard analysis looks at everything that might go wrong.
That's a solid example. It clearly highlights the difference between a failure mode and a broader hazard, showing how each approach complements the other. 4. How do you determine the occurrence O value in risk assessment?
It's all about data, data, data. We don't guess. We base it on historical failure rates, post-market surveillance, clinical studies, and bench testing. For instance, if an orthopedic implant fractures in 1 out of 10,000 cases, that's a low occurrence rating. But if it fails in 1 out of 500 cases, red flag. That's a high occurrence, meaning we need design changes, stronger materials, or additional quality controls. It's not just about raw numbers, though. Detectability matters, too. If failures are caught early via imaging, occurrence ratings might be adjusted accordingly.
I appreciate that you emphasize data-driven decision-making. Using historical failure rates, post-market data, and clinical evidence is critical for accurate risk assessment. 5. What would be the occurrence rating if a failure leads to patient death?
Okay, so severity S for death is always maxed out, typically 10 on an FMEA scale. That's non-negotiable. But occurrence O, that depends on real-world data. If this fatal failure happens in 1 out of 100,000 patients, the occurrence rating is low. But if it's 1 in 1,000, that's a major issue. It could trigger a recall, immediate design changes, or even regulatory action. The key is we don't assume, we use actual failure rates to make data-driven decisions.
That's exactly right. Severity for death is always the highest, but the occurrence rating depends on real-world failure data, not assumptions. What defines an acceptable residual risk?
Residual risk is what's left after we've done everything feasible to reduce it. It's acceptable if 1. All possible risk controls have been applied. 2. The remaining risk is outweighed by the device's benefits. 3. There's a plan to monitor it over time. For example, a pacemaker might have a small infection risk, even after rigorous sterilization. If removing that risk would mean making the pacemaker less effective, that's not an option. Instead, we justify it through clinical data, risk-benefit analysis, and proper user training.
That's a well-structured response. Acceptable residual risk is all about balancing safety with clinical benefits, and post-market surveillance plays a key role in monitoring it over time. How do you incorporate human factors engineering into risk management?
Human error is one of the biggest risk factors. That's where human factors engineering, HFE, comes in. Let's say we're designing a surgical tool. If the controls are too complex, the risk of misuse or handling errors skyrockets. Through usability studies, real-world testing, and feedback from actual users, we can make the design more intuitive, maybe with color-coded grips or better ergonomics. Regulators like the FDA and MDR require human factors validation, especially for devices where mistakes could lead to serious harm.
Absolutely. Human error is a major factor in device safety, and usability studies help prevent misuse. Regulators emphasize human factors engineering for a good reason. DAWA 8. How do design verification and validation V&V support risk management?
Verification V checks. Did we build the device correctly? Validation V checks. Does the device work for its intended purpose? For example, an implant's strength is verified through mechanical testing. Does it meet stress requirements? Meanwhile, biocompatibility is validated through clinical trials. Is it safe in a real patient? If we fail in either, back to the drawing board. That's why V&V is so crucial. It ensures safety and compliance before the device reaches the market.
As you mentioned, verification ensures the device meets design specifications, while validation confirms it meets user needs. Both are essential for safety before market release. 9. How would you handle a competitor's recall impacting your device category?
Great question. A competitor's recall isn't just their problem. It can signal a broader issue in the industry. So here's what I do. 1. Immediate internal risk assessment. Does our device share the same design flaw? 2. Post-market data review. Have we seen similar complaints or failure patterns? 3. Regulatory communication. If needed, we notify authorities proactively. It's better to be transparent than caught off guard. 4. Mitigation strategy. If any risk is identified, we act fast. Design changes, user training, and updated warnings. The goal? Stay ahead, ensure patient safety, and maintain trust in our device. That's the kind of structured yet conversational approach you'd want in an interview. Would you like me to tweak anything further?
That's a great approach. Proactively assessing internal risks, reviewing post-market data, and communicating with regulators can prevent similar issues and maintain trust in your device. This has been a great discussion. You've demonstrated a solid understanding of risk management in the medical device industry. Would you like to add anything before we wrap up?
Thank you. I really appreciate the discussion. It was engaging and covered critical aspects of risk management. If I had to add anything, I'd emphasize that risk management isn't just about compliance. It's about designing safer devices that truly benefit patients. Also, staying proactive, whether through post-market surveillance, competitor recalls, or usability testing, can make a huge difference in identifying risks before they become serious issues. I enjoyed this conversation and would love the opportunity to apply my experience in a role like this. Thanks again for your time.